further ado. Abnormal psychology is a branch of psychology, and they study atypical, abnormal behaviors of members of our society. So any valuation of social norms is framed under the definition of abnormality. And that refers to not only behaviors, but also thinking and reactions. So the main topics of abnormal psychologists would be to understand, to study, evaluate, diagnose, treat, and prevent any psychological disorders. So we are really talking about psychopathologies here. And by those, there's a really great range of these disorders, but we can think about OCDs, personality disorders, depressions, anxieties, anything really that you can learn from my videos at my channel, agstherapy.com. Now, the definition of the word abnormal it's quite problematic here, because who decides, right? Who decides what is normal and who decides what's not normal? What's the right definition of norm? You know, and what are we going to do with culture? What are we going to do with age? What are we going to do with religious beliefs? You know, with all those diversities, don't forget that psychology had been created and is developed mainly by white Western men. So that's not really applicable. That's not really applicable across the board as we think about global psychology. Now, there are a few models in abnormal psychology that allows us to class psychopathologies, and one would be the biological one. And if you are looking at psychopathologies from that perspective, you will have idea that any disorders, physical disorders such as brain disorders, and any disorders of autonomic nervous systems are causing mental disorder. So this is that direction. Another perspective of psychopathology, I would say that, well, actually, any mental illness is caused by unconscious conflict. And that's probably created by some events in your childhood, and they created early defense mechanisms, right? And they sort of creating suppression of your emotions, of your thoughts. So that's psychoanalytic approach. But there's also behavioral approach to understand, that helps to understand psychopathologies. And that perspective sees mental disorders from the learning theory. And it says that any abnormal behavior is learned, and it creates stress, and it can be relearned. But there's also cognitive perspective, and that's why they go probably both hand in hand as a cognitive behavior approach. And cognitive perspective says that the idea of mental disease or mental disorder actually is rooted from disorders in your thought process. So by changing your faulty conditioning, you can elevate a mental health disorder. Right, so this is very mainstream approach. Do you remember when I asked this question, who decides what's normal? What is the norm, right? So we as Muslims and we as Islamic psychologists, we would go back to Quran and Sunnah and see what is it said there about pathologies. And there are three themes actually, which help us to understand that you can pathologize, you can think about pathology in your thoughts, emotions, behaviors, and spirituality, in relationship with others, in relationship with God, and relationship with yourself. And we're predominantly speaking about sins and diseases of the heart. So in terms of relationship that you create with others, you can fall into trap of mocking, being boastful, stingy, provocating. You could have prejudice. You can break the promise. You can turn it into hypocrite. You can reveal others people's faults or sins. You can be materialistic in relationship with others. You can also be unfair in relationship with God. By unfair, I mean breaking everything that you know about him and how he allows you to draw closer to him. So you can bring that by committing shirk, which is adding partners by creating bidah in your life, like additions to religion. You can also commit kufr, which is knowing the truth and still not following it, and so forth. But you also also kind of pathologize our well-being, including spiritual being and self-development well-being, by falling into other diseases of the heart on the level of relationship with the self, on the level of relationship, actually self-developmental journey. And that would be anger, being forgetful, being anxious, being even coward, giving into waswas, falling into hopelessness, being greedy, being deceitful, jealous or envy, also loving positions and loving this world, being arrogant, showing off riyah. So this is what Islamic psychology takes as a guide in terms of spiritual pathologies, which can also impact, and they normally do, our thoughts, our emotions, our behaviors, our character, our choices. Anything that has been explored in mainstream psychology, anything that we discussed so far, also has a good stand, but don't forget about spiritual layer. And at the spiritual layer, normally what is found is there is a seed of any other pathology, right? So so that would be the in the natural interpretation of pathologizing or abnormal psychology for you. I hope that was useful.